Okay, I'm not kidding you, but in today's video, I'm going to show you an interview that I did with someone who has refinished furniture that belonged to Abraham Lincoln. I'm not kidding you. Today, for episode 72 of my Thrift Diving Podcast, did you know that I have a podcast? I am interviewing Gary LeClerc. He is the owner of StripWell. He's been refinishing furniture for over 24 years. So he was nice enough to sit down with me and allow me to pick his brain and find out, how do you get started with refinishing furniture? What are the products that you should use that are safe, that's not going to harm you? And we talked about all those things. So if you were a beginner and you've been wanting to redo furniture and you want some tips on how to get started, or maybe you have experience, but you just want to know a little bit more, guess what? This video is for you. So be sure to sit back, grab a drink, have a listen, and this is episode 72 of the Thrift Diving Podcast. However, I want to tell you there are 71 more episodes. So if you didn't know that, be sure to go down below, click the link, listen to all the other podcast episodes. That's okay, you can binge it. I'll give you permission to do that. And let me know what you think of this episode down in the comments. All right, let's jump into the episode right now. All right, Gary, thank you so much for joining me today for episode 72 of the Thrift Diving Podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you because you have the experience of doing some furniture restorations for quite a long time. You've been doing this for a while and you've developed some safer products, thankfully, that hopefully my audience and myself can begin using. And so we're just going to jump right into this conversation. What is your experience with stripping and how did you develop your own product? And what was it about what was currently on the market that made you say, hey, we need something safer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my background is actually 23 years of furniture restoration. So I started, my dad started our family business when I was about 6 years old. So I grew up around it my whole life. So he did work, to sell, but also primarily for clients who brought him pieces to restore. So I was around it my entire life. And to be honest, I never thought I would stick with it. I thought it was going to be just a kind of a blink in my timeline, but I just fell in love with the art of it. I always loved the arts. And once I saw the art and restoration, I just fell in love with the craft. So that was my background. And really just recently in the last couple of years is really when I started to want to do what I could to innovate the restoration kind of industry, because I had been around it for so long. Now my dad, who's retired, I kind of see some of the side effects that the business could have on a person if they're not taking care of themselves. He's from the generation that would often neglect to put the mask on or put the gloves on and sort of, not take care of themselves as well as they should. And we're all sort of probably at sometimes guilty of that. But so I've seen him, I've seen the side effects, and I just said, there's so many people out there who are trying to do it either as a hobby or professionally. And there's just not a lot of great options. So that's sort of what set me out on the path to start to develop QCS. But yeah, it was just really from the love of the restoration business, but then also into keeping people safe and doing something that's greener for everyone.
So can I ask you about some of those like side effects that you're noticing from your dad? Because you're right, we're all guilty of this. I remember when I first started refinishing furniture, which I would say was probably about 2012. I was painting, but I was stripping as well. And you're right. I would be like stripping and I don't know, I don't necessarily have a mask, or I'm working in an area in my garage that doesn't have a lot of ventilation. And I remember, no joke, I would be like putting some furniture stain on something that I just stripped, and I would have it literally all over my hands. I wasn't even wearing gloves. And I'm taking pictures of it like it's a badge of honor, showing people in blog posts like, oh my gosh, look what I did. Yeah. And I don't think people realize how toxic a lot of this stuff is. So what are some of those symptoms that you feel were connected to some of the years of furniture refinishing that your dad was doing?
Really the three most hazardous parts of restoration is really the beginning and in the middle and the end. It's the stripping, the sanding, and then the finishing. All along the way, you have different hazards. And if you're not careful, they can really do a number on you over time. So it starts off where you're, today I won't wear a mask, but tomorrow I will. But then it turns into never wearing a mask or never wearing protection. And it just sort of progresses. So with stripping, some of the chemicals we use, we were a commercial business. So we had drums of stripper coming to us. And so it wasn't just going to the hardware store and buying, a little can here and there. It was 55 gallons of of methylene chloride based strippers for all those years. So for me, it's seeing in him just his memory loss. It's seeing things like that, which they haven't pinpointed to be specifically, this is the cause of that, but it's very much, likely a part of it. And so, methylene chloride has been taken off the shelves for the consumer. And I'm sort of glad they have, because when it's misused, it's very dangerous for anyone. And so we had to suit up, we had to masks, respirators, ventilation, gloves up to, it was just really, it was like going to war. and I'm so, imagining,
it's triggering my Breaking Bad.
Yeah, exactly. We look just like Bryan Cranston.
Hazmat suits.
Yeah, exactly. But no, so we did that for years, because again, when you're in business, you're thinking about efficiency and how fast something can get done. And sometimes we just kind of devalue our health. We devalue other things that should be so much more important, just for the speed of getting something done, or for the price. That's the other thing, is like, it's amazing how, just to save a little bit on a price tag will shave years off of our life, So I just sort of changed my way of thinking and said, number one, even though getting rid of it correctly, having a company come in and remove it and do all of that, the waste, even still, it's going somewhere. And it just didn't sit well with me that we were also doing that, that we were going through product and it was going places. And even though it was technically the right way, it was still just not something I was comfortable with. So that's where I was like, we got to do something different. And I just started to head down that path to get away from it as much as possible. So,
we also, before it was actually banned, some of I think you said it was methyl chloride.
Methylene
right?
chloride. Yeah.
Methylene chloride. Mm-hmm. Because we were finding this on the shelves, we automatically assumed that it was safe. Right. So we didn't necessarily read the fine print. In fact, I think there was some stories that I may have referenced in, one of the blog posts that I'd written, that people died. People were dying, maybe not in huge numbers, but all it takes is that one person who's your family member who dies because they use this product that was on the shelf. So now this was being banned. I don't know how many years it's been banned. Do you know how long it's been banned? It's been
at least a few years. I'm not 100% certain on and the ban was more for the consumer market. So at the hardware stores, it's still available. It's still out there on a commercial market. It's just not available to the consumer, because like you said, people walk in, they assume if it's on the shelf that someone must have put a stamp of approval that it's safe, but they're just unaware. So,
right. Yeah. Well, and I know I'm going to butcher the name of this, but the compound that I had found and I'm not going to say by name, but I will leave the link down below for episode 49, when I did an episode on toxic stripper. And this was a soy-based gel stripper that I'd been using for years. I promoted it on my channel. It's soy-based, right? It's got to be safer. Well, I did a little bit of digging, and it's got a compound called NMP. I don't know if you've heard of that, but and I'm going to try to pronounce this, N-methyl, maybe M-methyl pyrrolidone.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I would say it any better, so that's pretty good. Yeah.
So we're going forward. We'll have a link to it down in the show notes, but I'm just going to call it NMP. And in doing my research on this soy gel stripper, I realized that it was in the stripper that I've been promoting. Yeah. And apparently Home Depot, Lowe's, they wouldn't even carry any stripper that had this NMP in it. And that was the reason why you couldn't find this particular soy-based gel stripper at Home Depot or Lowe's, because they wouldn't carry it. Right. You could only find it, I think, at some Ace Hardwares, maybe on Amazon, but it was more so like Ace Hardware, individually, locally owned stores. Yeah. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't use this. And I don't remember what some of the side effects of it were. Again, I'll leave that information below, but it was something that you definitely didn't want in your stripper. Right. And so I started going down this road of, well, what do I use? And there were products that I could find that didn't have it, but then some of them still caused irritation, and maybe they were available on Amazon, maybe they weren't. And there wasn't something that I could just point people to that, hey, this is going to work. So it's funny how you and I met. I'll just tell them this story here. So my local woodcraft store, there's 3 owners, husband and wife, and then there's another gentleman there. Great people. Over the years, I've bought plenty of tools and materials from them. And so we had developed this working relationship where we tried to collaborate on some things. Well, when they had seen that blog post about this soy-based gel stripper, they said, "Oh my gosh, we've been carrying this. We thought it was safe." I'm like, "Yeah, it's got NMP in it." So they said, "Yeah, this is not good. We've got to find something else." So they found your product and QCS stripper.
Yep.
And so they reached out to you first and they said, "Hey, you've got to look up Serena."
Yep.
So you started following me on Instagram, didn't realize you were following me.
Yep.
He then reached out to me. Chris reached out to me and said, "Hey, we finally got this product in. We think it's along the line of what you're looking for because we know this is what we're looking for. Go find them on Instagram." So I go and find you and find that you're already following me.
Yeah.
So that's how we made the connection. For anyone who's listening, wondering how you and I connected, it was the local woodcraft store in Rockville, Maryland. Thank you, Chris, all of you for coordinating this. So tell me about QCS and what does QCS stand for? And why is this product different than what's already on the market?
Yeah. Well, it all started with, I actually developed it for just us to use in-house. So it wasn't developed to be a product, to be honest. It was developed for us because I was tired of using methylene chloride and those things. So I said, let me just start using it. And I wanted something that I could believe in because, again, I'd been doing it professionally for 23 years. My dad started our business in 1986 and he took over a previously owned business. So it's kind of a long line there. But I wanted to develop it for in-house use so that I could hire and know that I wasn't putting anyone in danger, just to know that across the board I could feel better about what I was using in-house. And then as I was using it, and I was just sort of blown away by just how it worked for us and how it was, I said, this would be a really good option for other people, and that's where I sent it out to some beta testers across the country, Hawaii, and different places I knew. And I said, try it out, see what you think. I'm thinking of putting it out there. And they were like, yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, it works a little differently, but it works, And so that's where it sort of started, and it just snowballed. And one of my side passions is the idea of like lean manufacturing and the idea of eliminating waste across the board. So for me, rapid prototyping and just getting something in the hands of people and getting honest feedback is, to me, very valuable. So I didn't try to perfect the packaging or do anything upfront. I said, let's just get it in the hands of users and let's see what they think. So we just started to get it out into like little rings of users as it kind of expanded. And more people were just like, this is really awesome. Like, this is better than what we've used compared to anything. And for different reasons, because you have people with different values. You have people who have the value of being safe and healthy. And then you have people who they want it to actually work, and people who are trying to kind of make all these dots connect. And it's hard to find one product that will do that. But QCS stands for quick, clean, and safe. And that was sort of just a really easy, quick name that we came up with that was just like, that just says what it is. The goal is to be quick, clean, and safe, and just make that the identity of the product. And our business is StripWell. And the idea of that kind of came out of, I see a lot of people in the internet giving advice of how to strip things and what to do. And a lot of it's kind of bad advice, to be honest. Products being used are very, very unhealthy. And so I wanted people to live well and to just have this good experience, but then also strip well, to start the project well and then lead to a good finish. So it kind of encompassed all those feelings. So that's sort of how it began. And from there, it's just been sort of a kind of a wild ride. People have been getting on board and loving it, and word's been spreading. And I'm very excited about, just the response we've gotten.
So you mentioned that it works a little differently. So how does it work differently from what they may be used to? And I did get a chance to sample it. So I can tell you that I liked it. I actually like the packaging because it was so simple. I mean, seriously, when I took it out of its packaging, and maybe what you sent to me is what you had sent to most people, but it literally just looks like a nice, clean spray bottle. And it's got QCS on the front, and it just, it looked, remember how when people were starting to use Google and it was just like this plain white background and it was just this search field and there was nothing else on the page.
Right.
That's what it reminded me of. It's just this simple product that works. And, you're not pulling it out with all these fancy things on, packaging or anything. It's just, I'm using this clean product and I'm going to strip this thing. So how does it work differently compared to what they may be used to?
So, when you compare, there's a whole spectrum of removers, and I've used them all. I mean, I can only think of a handful probably that are not available in the US or whatever that I haven't used, but pretty much every option I've tried, always looking for different ways. This is prior to actually developing QCS, but I'm always looking for a healthier way, finding that a lot of the products used creative marketing to kind of sell something that wasn't fully true. They would sort of be partially honest, which is, I guess is better than flat out lying, but it's it's partial honesty. So, a lot of people, when they smell something, they go, oh, that smell must be the key ingredient. But then you find out that that odor was added to mask the chemical smell. So it's not really, it's all kind of smoke and mirrors sometimes. And then the packaging was to look happy, and the color choices, it was all intentional to get people to say, well, that's a healthy choice. There's green leaves on the packaging. It must be a green product, things like that.
Or they say that it's soy-based, and you're like, soy's healthy, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's it. There is that in it. So that's true. But then what else is in it? And that's the difference. So the way it's different is, it's, first of all, it's a liquid. And now that's a learning curve, because a lot of people, they are used to the gels. They like the way that it sticks to the sides of vertical, items and things like that. It sort of sits. And so that was a difference. The only thing that the reason we went with liquid was because, in our shop, when we were stripping for years, we use what's called a flow over system, which is sort of the industry standard for professional shops. It's, you put a piece of furniture in this tank and you literally scrub wash it like you would, give it a bath with a brush. So it had to be liquid.
Do they also call this, I'm sorry to interrupt, but while you're mentioning that, I want to make sure I ask this question. Do these places that do this procedure, are they also called like dip and strip?
Sometimes,
people know them as like dip and strip.
Yeah, there's dipping, which is kind of gone out of favor because of the damage it can do on furniture. That's where you literally submerge a piece in a vat, and you pull it out. And what that does is, number one, when you're dealing with like glue joints, that can make things completely come unglued. Number two, if it's veneers, it can create bubbling and delamination. It can also chemically burn the wood or stain the wood. So dipping has sort of fallen out of favor. It's only used now primarily for extreme, like architectural, heavily painted things that you really need to like let sit for days sometimes. So what we used was a flow over system. So it's very much like just giving it a scrub bath. So the liquid's always coming off. And the reason why that's efficient is because, especially with carved and detailed pieces, the liquid gets out of your way. It kind of flows through the nooks and crannies, versus the gels that end up kind of becoming a nightmare at the end, because they get into those nooks and crannies and you can't get it out. So you spend more time at the end. So it might seem like a positive, but it ends up almost becoming a negative. We also, it's clear. We wanted it to be clear, because some of the products that are on the market have like a color to them. So when you put it on, you lose sight of what you're actually stripping because it's a color, and you can't see what you're doing. So the liquid that's clear gives you, it's almost like you're working with water. You can kind of see right through it. You can move it around and let it do its thing. So that's been very helpful for people that are stripping very detailed things, like turned legs on pieces and carvings on more Victorian type furniture. It takes longer, but a different time is sort of an interesting thing. So there's time, like how long it takes to work, but then there's like, how much time do you put into it actually, like with labor? And so in business, from my perspective, labor time is what I'm most concerned about. I don't care if it takes a while to work, as long as I'm not actually having to do anything.
Right.
So what I like about QCS and what I really wanted to design into it was the idea that you could like wet a piece down. I'm thinking a lot for the kind of that DIYer who's at home, maybe a stay-at-home mom with, a baby in the house, can go out, put a coat on the piece in the garage, and go inside and just walk away and not have to think about it. Then come back an hour later or 30 minutes later and go, oh, wow, okay, it's ready to go. And the other issue we found with other products was that if you left it on, it would stain the wood. I don't know if you've seen any videos of people sharing about that, but they'll put it on, they'll walk away, they come back, they take it off, and now it's got these weird stains everywhere. The saran wrap method is some, people use that. They put saran wrap. We don't recommend that for QCS at all, because the saran wrap kind of creates a weird dynamic as it dries. As those strippers dry, they create marks. So all these little things are different for the average user, because they're used to the gel, they're used to these saran wrap methods or these different approaches, and QCS just works differently. We have found that we call it a vintage finish remover. That's on purpose, because newer finishes are totally a different chemistry. So you really don't have a one size fits all chemical, that other than like a methylene chloride, which we're trying to get away from. So we really focused on the type of furniture that the average user would be stripping, which is, kind of 1970s and earlier, maybe,
yes.
that kind of vintage, and this does great on almost every finish from that period, from there back. Occasionally you run into one that it struggles with, but for the most part, it will take off almost any of those. And that was really our target for this formula, was that type of age.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like the part where you're telling me that you're just spraying it on and, it's just sort of doing its magic, and it's getting into the nooks and crannies. I can't tell you how many things that I have avoided refinishing just because it has nooks and crannies. Mm-hmm. I will look at something, and if it has the nooks and crannies, I'm like, nope, that gets paint. I'm not going to strip that, because it's a nightmare. And you're right. You're taking little pins, like little, when you're sewing and you've got those little quilting pins, you're taking those and you're scraping it out of the joints and the cracks. I've done that. Yeah. And it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that there's a product that actually will get into those areas and strip it, and then not leave behind all the gunk that will get settled into those cracks. Now, let's assume for a second that someone who's listening to this, maybe they've got some experience with stripping. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they can learn something. Let's say that they go and they find 1970s dresser. It's in pretty good condition, but they definitely need to strip it down and start over. Let's walk through that process. So what would your process be from start to finish?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, if you're selecting a piece, because I can also speak into the restoration, the whole picture of it. Mm-hmm. If you're selecting a piece, there's things you want to look for too, before even making it a candidate. You want to make sure it's a solid piece. You want to make sure that there's if the veneer is not a problem. There's this like weird. Some people feel that anything that's veneered is like an inferior piece. That's actually not true at all. It's really what the veneer is on. So a lot of times on pretty much from the 1960s and 70s and forward, you find that a lot of it's on particle board, fiber board. And that's where it could be a problem, because that's not a solid wood. So when you add moisture to that, it can be like a sponge and just absorb it and swell and turn into a mess. So people need to be aware of that as they're selecting, is to pick a good candidate, something that's solid wood or a really, overall strong piece to begin with. Mm-hmm. From there, when you start the process with QCS, I'll speak into that specifically. We do have some videos on like our YouTube where we show comparisons with different products and whatnot. But with QCS, you would set it up and just give it a light mist at first. The instructions are pretty explanatory of what to do, but you would put a coat on, a light coat, so it kind of grabs into the finish that you're trying to remove. Because it's not a gel, you want to just do a light mist to soften everything, so it kind of allows it to hold on better. And then every 15 minutes, I like to check in on it and just keep applying it. The things that we find, let me step back too. Another big craze lately has been the oven cleaner stripping. I don't know if you've seen that on. Have you heard about that at all?
I've heard of that. I've never done it, but I've heard of it.
So that's one that kind of, I don't know where it started from, like the origination of that, but people are in their driveways spraying furniture with the oven cleaner, which is very, I don't have to explain why that's not a good idea, but it's not a good idea. And so a lot of the reason they did that was because they liked that they could spray it on, scrub it with a brush, and then hose it off with their hose, and it could just run off. So all the oven cleaner was running off into the ground and everything. So with QCS, you could do the same method. You can apply it out in your driveway and use a scrub brush and scrub it. And then when you're done, you can hose it off. We say if it's generally we say use the QCS as the afterwash, but you can also use, a water spray down too, to kind of shoot it in there and get it out of all the nooks and crannies and details. And that helps as well. But I would say that one of the biggest keys to QCS is patience. It says it in the instructions. Is don't rush it, because that'll just frustrate you. If you put it on and you want to just get it done right now, don't take that approach. Take the approach of, okay, I'm going to get this done today, but just take a more relaxed approach. When I'm working on projects, I tend to sort of work on multiples at once. I sort of we'll wet one piece and go over to another. And by the time I'm back around, I'm able to start working on the first, or I go do something else. We all have busy lives, like go get an errand, run an errand and come back, or do something, fill the time with other things, and don't try to just sit and hover waiting for it to work. It'll work really quickly on some, and then other times it might just take a little longer. And then from there, once it's showing that it's given up, it's surrendered, and you can see it's coming off, I always recommend scrubbing it wet. And people sometimes don't do this and they run into a little bit of a headache. I usually just have a little cup of QCS there and I dip some steel wool and just scrub wet. And what that does is just help to really get everything off more easily. And then at that point, just wipe it down. And what's cool too is nothing is flammable in the product. So rags and such, you don't have to worry about.
Oh, that's great.
There's so many products that you don't realize, like stains and oil finishes and so many things that if you put the rag somewhere, people have burned their houses down, burned their shops down because it combusts just sitting, over in the corner. So this, this is not like that at all. You can wipe it down and then just throw them in the trash because it's totally biodegradable. So you could literally pour QCS down the drain because it's totally biodegradable. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, whenever I've worked on a project and I've been using oil-based products and stripper and oil-based stains, you would go to the side of my house where all the recycling bins are, and you see so many like multiple rags just laid over everything.
Just drying out. Yeah.
Just drying out because you're like, I can't throw this stuff away. Yeah. And I don't know if that's something that most people realize, that they are a fire hazard. They can just automatically, spontaneously combust and, start a fire. So, okay. So you've used this, you're using steel wool. Mm-hmm. You're using a little bit of the QCS to, wet sand that and get some of that gunk off. So once you've gotten that off, then you said you're using some of the QCS to wipe it clean, sort of like the afterwash.
Yeah. So there's other products that sometimes they'll have like a 2-step process. They'll have like the stripper and then the afterwash. Yes. Or a lot of people are used to the method of using a stripper, then going over it with mineral spirits or something like that. That's kind of the common one. Or sometimes an alcohol or acetone. All of which are very flammable. So, so our recommendation is to avoid all of those. People are always like, well, can I use acetone? I'm like, well, you can, but our goal is to move you away from all of those things, So yes, you could, but we recommend just using it as an afterwash because it works as both. So you can strip with it. And then once you've wiped all the residue off, then go back over it with a clean round. And that'll help to just give it that final cleansing before you let it dry. It takes a little longer to dry because we've also developed it to not evaporate quickly so that you can put it on and walk away and it won't just evaporate and dry. Like it's called flashing off. Acetone, if you've ever used it, it dries very quickly. So if you put it on a surface, it just kind of evaporates. Same with alcohol, it's gone. So, we wanted it to dry really, really slowly so that it could really work longer. And that's what it does. It really, even if you sit it on the shelf life is like, we don't know exactly what it is because it's years because it doesn't evaporate. It just sort of stays liquid. So on the piece, it won't evaporate. And it's cool because, it'll work when you're not there. You can walk away. We've left it overnight, come back the next day, and it's still working. So that's the kind of the neat thing about it.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, which is why, again, it's working for you when you're asleep, where other products, I would never recommend leaving it overnight because you'd come back the next day and you'd probably have a real potential disaster on your hands.
Oh, yeah. I could just imagine. I mean, it would be dried and you'd have to, it would be flaky. You wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
No, I like that it doesn't dry so quickly so that you could, maybe put it on at 8:00. Like if you know that this is going to be your weekend project, put it on Friday night in your garage. Now before I finish that thought, I want to make sure that I'm pointing this out. So this is something that people should not, or can they use it indoors?
So it's funny. We have users all over. And they send videos, like they'll tag us in videos, and there's people who are literally like stripping furniture in their apartment in the city. Like it's really funny. They couldn't do that. They can't do it with other strippers because their neighbors will complain. But they are. Now I recommend for it is number one, people, let me get my thoughts here. It is safe to use without gloves. I strip without gloves sometimes. I recommend people wear gloves because everyone's sensitivity is different to everything. So like some people can use a soap in their bathroom and it might cause a reaction with their hands. So I say, act like it could hurt you, even though it won't, but act like it can, and then you'll be safe. Same with airflow ventilation. I always put a fan in my work environment just to move the air. That's all. Or if you're outside, that's great. So if you're in a closed-in area, you can use it, but you've used it yourself. So you know that there is an odor to it. It's not odorless.
Right.
It has a smell. And just like any smell, it can get to you after a period of time if you're really stuck in it. But the good thing is there are no carcinogens or anything in it that are harmful. So like you can breathe it in. You have to be careful that breathing in too much doesn't irritate you. Like, again, some people have sensitivities to breathing in things. So you have to just be cautious of that. But it's not doing that deep harmful stuff that other products could be doing. And that's the big plus. So yeah, you could do it indoors. If you could be outside, that's always ideal, just because you get great airflow and you're not kind of stuck in the odor of it all.
Right. So going back to my scenario, so Friday night you could set up a tarp, something on your floor, because you're gonna spray this and it's gonna drip down to your floor as it's dripping. So Friday night, 8 o'clock, strip it down. Saturday morning when you wake up, it's ready to go, and then you can spend your weekend on it. Okay, good. Yeah. So when you've washed it down with the QCS, you're ready to move forward. I always sand, because you just need a good sanding. So can we talk about like what your sanding process is? Like once you've removed that final layer, you've washed it with the QCS, then what do you do?
So another thing, and this is where you can manipulate time in the restoration process. So what you do is you end up stealing time from one step and putting it into another step. I always say that now with QCS, if you can take the time and put more time into getting it really clean in the stripping process, which most people just hate the stripping process. Like it's like the worst part. And I think that's one of the reasons why painting furniture kind of comes and goes in these kind of big movements, because people want to freshen something up. They want to do something to change the style. But the idea of stripping it and redoing it is like, that's way too much. So I can redo the top in wood and then just paint everything else. That's easier. Other times it's a style thing. It's just, I want a color, I want to add a pop, and that's a totally different reason. But I think a lot of it has to do with, I don't want to strip that whole buffet. I want to just, I'm just going to prime it and paint it, and then I'll do the top and it'll look great. And so I think that that's one of the things that changes the game, is that now people can take the time and strip safely, and they might actually be able to restore something, more authentically, so it may be that they're like, well, I'm just going to paint it because I can't restore it. Well, now they can, now they could take the time and do it. Most of the formulas on the market have water added to the formula, and that causes what's called, it raises the grain. So when you'll find after you strip, sometimes that the texture of the wood just feels a little bit rough, and that's why you sand it to lower the grain. With QCS, it doesn't do that because there's no water in it at all. There's no water in the formula, so it won't raise the grain. And I've tested this myself. I've stripped something, let it dry, and then gone without touching it with anything else, just the QCS. I've then coated it with lacquer. I have a spray booth and everything else, and sprayed it with lacquer. And now here we are 6 to 8 months later now, I don't know exactly. It's still completely intact, no reactions, no negative issues at all. It feels just like it would have if I would have spent all the time sanding it. So in certain cases, you can skip most of the sanding if you've taken some of that time and invested into the stripping part. So I say, take the time, wash it, get it really super clean. And that also saves you lots of time. Like in my business, when I was restoring, it was restoring like very valuable mid-century modern furniture, things that had to be a certain way. It couldn't be up to me. It couldn't just happen. It had to be a specific color, a specific finish, all of that. And so what I would find is that in some pieces, if I sanded too much, I would kind of lose the patina that could have been preserved. And so then I would have to manipulate colors and stains and toning. And so I was able to just remove all the old grime and finish, and then just clear it with a finish. And it almost was exactly the factory finish right there without any effort. So it saved me so much time in finishing, so much time in sanding. All those steps got way shorter, but I just took more time up front. And that's my recommendation, is you don't have to sand if you do it really well, but you may need to just do a light sanding after the stripping process.
So then what about some of the other products that you use, like specifically in your shop, that you might be able to recommend if they're available, for DIYers like myself? Because I can imagine, sort of like the example that you had given before, if you're using QCS, you don't necessarily want to then go use after wash, right? You want to kind of stick with this environmentally friendly product and process and lifestyle. So then once you get to that point, when you want to add some stain, what are those products that you're using that are, water-based, that are, non-toxic, or even any sort of top coats that you're using that you can put your stamp of approval on?
Yeah. Well, it's hard because we have watched this sort of evolution of moving away from these sort of solvent-based VOC, heavy VOC products, trying to get into the green. And some products are doing really well with that. The limitation sometimes is that you're not going to get like if you have a specific look in mind, you almost have to let the product dictate the final look versus having a look and then trying to, the green products sometimes just don't get you to the look you need. Like in my business, I had to reproduce a factory finish that looked like it was authentic from, 1950 or whatever it was, or earlier. And so I had to use products that would get me there. And sometimes it was historical. So you had to use the historical finish, so I was limited to some degree on my end, but there are some great products. It's come a long way, especially in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years. I feel like it's really accelerated. I feel like it's catching up finally, which is cool to see. Some of my finishes that I really like, again, they're ones that I think are user friendly, and they can provide a really nice look. I like Rubio Monocoat. It's an oil. It's a one-step oil. It's a little pricey. Usually green products, even ours, I mean, to be honest, I wish it could be cheaper. It's just the ingredients cost so much.
How do I spell that? The
Rubio Monocoat?
Rubio?
Yeah.
Rubio Monocoat?
Yeah. RUBIO, and then it's monocoat. So
monocoat. Rubio Monocoat.
A single coat is all you need. And it's a green product. You could use it even on like cutting boards and salad bowls. It's that safe. But it also, people use it on their floors and on their furniture. And it's a cool product because they have tinted oils, and you can, so you eliminate the staining steps. You eliminate your stains. You can find a tinted oil you like and then apply that. And it's very safe to use. It smells actually really nice too. It doesn't have an offensive odor. But that's a great finish. But that's going to give you kind of that raw look. It's not going to give you that sheen, that finished look. It's going to give you more of that unfinished sheen, which a lot of people like right now. It's almost that stripped and left alone look, like that raw. That's going to give you that look, but it's going to protect the wood to some degree, more than just leaving it raw. Leaving wood raw is not the best idea because it's
not
you
at
need
all.
You need to preserve it with something. The only problem is usually when you add a finish, it brings back the natural color that people are avoiding. And so that's why they don't want to put anything on it. But Rubio has some great colors that almost lightly pickle the wood or do something to kind of, mute that natural color from coming back. And so you can kind of preserve that raw sanded look without, without bringing back the natural color.
Ooh,
so that's a good one.
You got me curious. Are
Yeah,
there
that's
any
a good
other
one.
ones? Yeah, I'm going to get some of that.
Another product I really like. It's not necessarily a green product, but it's not it's not a horrible product. I'll say it's sort of in the middle somewhere. It's someone that it's Waterlock's oil finish. And I really like Waterlock's if you're looking to create a sheen and a more of a finished look versus a polyurethane or a lacquer or whatever. I like Waterlock's for a few reasons, and that's you can apply it like a tongue oil, wipe it on, wipe it off, and you could stop there. Or you can brush it on and actually build it more like a polyurethane or a surface coating. But what I love about it is that unlike some finishes that as you build layers over time, you create individual layers that can flake from each other. Waterlock's becomes one continuous layer. It's like a hybrid tongue oil. So it's like a tongue oil with a resin added to make it be able to build. So I use that a lot on Scandinavian furniture that I want to reproduce that nice like glow that furniture often had, but it didn't look over finished. It just had this nice glow. And I use Waterlock's on that type of furniture a lot. It's user friendly. I can spray it on, or I can brush it or rag it on. However, it's very flexible. So a lot of people have started using that just on my recommendation because it's a good product. It really gives a nice.
I'm going to try it based on your recommendation, and then I can keep recommending it to people.
Yeah, it's a good one. Your local Woodcraft probably has it.
Oh, you're right.
I think they probably do. That's one of those products that you could find it in most of those specialty sort of outlets or on Amazon, but it's usually not in the big box store. Neither is Rubio. Rubio is usually specialty also.
Okay, I'm going to check those out.
Yeah.
So tell me before I get into where you can tell me where we can get QCS and how to follow you on, on social media, Are there any last things that you think that anyone listening who loves DIY, who loves stripping, who loves just furniture restoration, any last tips or tricks or something that we didn't cover that you really wanted to share with people?
Yeah. I would say that's a loaded question. There's a lot of thoughts that come to my mind. I would say,
you have a brain. We want to pick it.
Yeah, no, I would say, number one, don't be afraid to screw up sometimes. I think that sometimes, and if you're posting things online, there's always people who are going to say you did something you shouldn't do, or you were wrong, or whatever else. And everyone has their own perspective. Clients would always ask me if I was doing a piece for them, can I do this? They would ask my permission. And I'd be like, it's going in your house, right? And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then you could do anything you want.
Right.
It really, I think there's this weird dynamic on social media sometimes where people are the purists over here, which I tend to be more in that camp just because of my background. But then there's like the DIY crowd that's willing to just try things and do things, and it's for their own style and their own expression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that don't be afraid to like try and fail and make a mistake. And that's how you learn. There's clients of mine that never know that I refinished their table 3 times while it was in my shop because I would try something or do something and it went wrong. I mean, you can't help it. So don't be afraid to mess up and keep trying. And then I would say, do your best to research products. There's a lot of really good products out there. They're just lesser known. They're not the big box store products necessarily like us. I mean, we're very small in the world of products. I mean, it's sort of a grassroots thing that we have going, which I love. I love that it is that way. I love that I could talk to almost every person that comes to us if I try to make time to do that. But I just think research your products and know what it could be doing to you. I think some of these things, there's neurological things that can happen. There's cancer, there's reproductive, there's a lot of dangerous stuff in these products. And I don't think that everyone really takes the time to really grasp what they're dealing with. And then if they have to deal with it, take the precautions and really, do it as safely as possible. If you're really going to stick with something that is unsafe, just do it as safely as you can.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that, be careful. There's a lot of advice out there. A lot of trends come and go. It's hard because there's no one person to listen to, and I'm not even that person necessarily. I might be to some crowds, but I just feel like, you have to just be careful. There's some people out there giving advice because they have a camera, and it may not be the best advice. It may be harmful to you or dangerous to you, or it may not be really actually good advice on the restoration end either. So other than that, yeah, I mean, I just say, just enjoy it. I mean, restoration is something that again, going back to the beginning, I was a musician. I got in with my dad because my dad was actually colorblind. So he restored furniture colorblind for years, and my mom would help him. And so I came into the business because I had a good eye for color, and it was supposed to be temporary. I was going to go off and be a rock star, do something else. And then I just fell in love with the art of it. I've worked on, I repaired a table once that was owned by Abraham Lincoln. I repaired the leg on it, and it was for a museum. And I've just been able to handle things that have been so interesting to handle. And everyone has their interests and everyone has their angle to the refinishing and the restoration, but just enjoy it because it's a lot of fun. If you kind of just take it in stride, learn, just research. It's fun when you kind of take it to more levels where it's not just changing the look of something, but learning how it's been built and learning who made it. And, all of that. It's just a really lifelong journey. It can be. That's a lot of fun.
So so I've got so many questions, as you're talking, I've got so many questions. I'm trying to jot them down. Okay. So the first question that I have, so for example, the fact that you did this table that Abraham Lincoln owned, it made me think about people that have these special pieces that might've belonged to their grandmother, great grandmother, their mother, and they want to restore it, but they're so afraid that they're going to mess up.
Right.
So I guess my question for you is, are there certain things that they can do to handle this piece with care so that they don't destroy it, or that how do they handle this delicate piece of furniture that they're so nervous about, but they don't want to make the mistake because this is something that's so special to their family, to them? What are some things that they can do to gently restore this?
Yeah, I mean, that was always like the thing that made me really, I did client furniture, and I would hear these stories. I would pick up the item, or they would bring it to my studio, and I realized I was handling something that you couldn't even put a value on. This is the trunk that my grandmother came from Ireland with, and that's the only thing we have of hers ever. And so now I'm now given
No
the,
pressure, no
yeah, no
pressure.
pressure, don't. And so yeah, there is this sense. I see it all the time on comments in chat rooms and forums and things on social media. Like, I want to restore my grandmother's this, but I'm afraid. What do I do? And there is a point where you can no longer keep something up and like maintain it. There is a point where you kind of have to start over. And that's where, depending on what it is, sometimes it is best to get a professional involved. There is a time for that. I think that professionals want you to think that's always the time. It's always don't ever do it yourself. But there is a time where you can do it yourself, and there's a time when it's kind of like taking care of your own health. There's a time where you can take vitamins and do your own thing, but then there's a time where you need a surgeon, who can fix you that you can't do yourself. So that's one thing. I've seen a lot of people try to do it and then mess it up because they use a product that they didn't realize would actually make a bigger issue. Something that a lot of people don't know is like polishes. They think every polish is created equal. So let me get a polish and just keep cleaning my furniture. But some of them have silicone in the polish, like Pledge. I'll name a brand because that's one that most people know. If there's any bare wood on a vintage piece showing or anything, it'll seep into the wood and it'll create a big problem in the refinishing process, because that silicone will create a problem with the finish adhering. So sometimes there's a point where you need to say, okay, this needs to be refinished now. Another one that a lot of people use is Restore a Finish by Howard's. It's a pigmented oil cleaner. And there's in again, all these products in a certain lane can be good, but if you put them in a lane they shouldn't be in, not good. So there's times where people will use that too much or on something they shouldn't, and they can ruin a piece with certain products, because that dye that's in that product can get into the wood and almost stain it forever. So there's just precautions like that. I like OZ polish. OZ polish is put out by a company called Mohawk. OZ polish is like there's an aerosol version. I think there's just a liquid version, but it's especially for vintage furniture, it's a very forgiving, easy polish to use. And it does a good job to kind of freshen something up and give it a new, a little bit of a lift, but not harm it. And I think that's a good one. But yeah, if you're going to try to take on a project yourself, just assess the risk versus reward thing. Sometimes it's worth, if it's an heirloom and you want it to last another 50 to 100 years, it might be worth just having someone do it that is reputable. And that's also, that's another tough thing to figure out, is who is and who isn't, because, but I would say, there are ways you could do it yourself. And there's times when you might want to just pass it on to a professional that has the experience. But
so that leads me to another question. So if someone was trying to find out if somebody was reputable, I mean, aside from going to, let's say, their Instagram, are there certain things that they should look for, certain questions they should ask in order to find that person who's going to protect this 100-year-old antique from Grandma Betty?
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. The thing is that there's, just like in any craft, I think that there's specialists, and if you find the person who sort of says, I can do it all, that always scares me a little bit, because, I mean, what are you the master of? What are you really good at? That's what you want to look for, is if you see somebody like, I sort of developed a name for more Scandinavian and mid-century modern furniture, the restoration of that. That's sort of what I grew into, because where that came from was I love that furniture. I love it because I tend to be a minimalist in my aesthetic. I don't like unnecessary anything. I don't like unnecessary carvings, or I like it to be very simple. And so that furniture just spoke to me. I love the craftsmanship of it. So I just really dove into that, and people started to realize that was my passion, and it's what I knew the best. So that's where I started to get mostly that furniture. But then there's people who, specialize in very historic antiques that are European. And I mean, there's just someone for every category. So it's really taking the time and interviewing them, because once they're done doing what they do, there's no turning back. So it's like anything, just take the time up front. it's okay to be annoying, because this is your family's, legacy, or this is something you really care about. Interview them like you're hiring, someone that is going to work for you, because that's what you're doing, is say, can you show me examples of your work? Can you, and hopefully today, most professionals have a good presence online to show pictures and before and after, things that, kind of give you that glimmer of hope of what they can do. And then maybe go a little deeper and find out what they're capable of. And price, almost universally, price is, the price tag should not be the dictator of something. A good product sometimes costs more. A good food costs more. A good refinisher might cost more. They don't always cost more. Sometimes you find one of those situations where it's not more, but don't just pick the cheapest person, because that usually backfires, or the cheapest product, because that also usually backfires as well.
That's good advice. I did have one other question that you were talking about. You were telling people, don't be afraid to mess up.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, was there a time when you messed up and you learned something from that mistake?
Yeah.
Tell me about a time you messed up.
Which time?
A time that was most memorable, where you're like, I can't believe I did that, but you learned something so important that you remembered it enough to share it with us today.
Yeah. Well, usually for me, it would be frustrating because, you get into the finishing process, and really the finishing process, when you're trying to produce a finish like you would get in a store, like a real professional grade finish, it can be very finicky. You look at a tabletop and you assume, oh, it's flat, it's going to be very easy to finish that perfectly. And it's not. That's actually one of the most challenging things is a tabletop, because it's the light just hits it. Everything is very, you can't miss a mistake on a tabletop.
Right.
And so there were many times where I would do a table and I'm trying to match it. They wanted the table done, but not the chairs or something like that. So I would have to match it to the chair. So I'm tweaking the color and I'm toning and I'm, and there's all this going into it. And then I go just too dark. I go over that line. It's like, oh, I just went too far now. And I look at it, I'm like, there's no way this is too far. And I've got to just take it all off and start all over again, because I'm a perfectionist. So yes, I could hope they wouldn't notice, or I could try to deliver it on the brightest sunny day that I could so that it looked lighter than it, but I knew that it's just not right. So you would strip it and do it over again. And that's a side note. One reason why I advise people against sanding finishes off as much as I see people sanding finishes off, and I'll explain why, is that a lot of times on furniture, like when I talk about having to redo something multiple times, even when it's in my hands, if you sand, especially a veneered piece, you remove so much of the material of the wood that eventually you can't do it anymore. You've sanded too much. Veneer is it's so thin that if you just grind it off, that's good for you, but the next person that wants to keep that piece alive is going to run into a problem. So that's why chemically removing the finish is the best way, because you're not harming the material at all. You're leaving as much as possible behind. And so that's why I recommend doing that instead of grinding. Even scraping, you have to be careful with that too. So that's one reason. But I would strip it again and do it over. I mean, I have so many stories where I'll finish a chair and I'll realize I glued a part in wrong. You look at the chair and you're like, oh, that's not the right spot for that, or something and now you have to disassemble the whole. It's like, there's so many horror stories that you try so hard, but you're just going to make mistakes. I mean, we're human. You can't help it. We're not a machine, So you try and I'm a perfectionist. So I'm really trying to think of everything, but refinishing and restoration, it's such an ongoing puzzle where every piece is different. Every
piece is different. Yep.
Yeah. So,
and that's how it is for me when I do DIY projects. Literally every project is different. So there's always something that happens. And so a lot of times, like the people that listen to this podcast, who watch this YouTube channel, the ones who are afraid to really jump in and get started, it's because they're afraid they're going to mess up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm still messing up. Gary still messes up, because each project is going to throw curveballs at you. And I don't know about you, but I think for me, probably you as well, the joy of being able to overcome that problem or figure out a solution, even though you've made the mistake and you got to strip it all over again. But then when you do it right, you're like, yes, I nailed it. there's a pride that comes with that. And I think there's a confidence that comes, and I've said this before, I think the difference between an amateur and a professional is that not that you won't make mistakes, but that a professional will keep at it and they'll eventually figure out a solution, or they may have a solution because they have the experience to say, oh, you know what? I did that. I shouldn't have done that. Let me try this. Right. And someone who's not a professional, they get easily discouraged and they throw their hands up and they say, well, I can't do this. I knew I was going to mess this up. Right. So I think for anyone who's listening, I think this is a good example of how you're going to make mistakes, but as you get more experience, you'll kind of learn from those. And then maybe instead of having to strip it 3 or 4 times, maybe you only do it twice.
Yeah. I was driving with my daughter, I think it was yesterday actually, or the day before, and she wants to be a singer. A lot of little girls want to be singers. And, and I was listening to a song and it was on my phone playing in the car. And I said, you see that the woman on the cover of the album? And she went, yeah, she didn't know what an album was, which made me feel really old too. I'd explained that was a sidetrack. But I said, at one point she was 5. And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, she was 5, just like you. And she had to learn to sing. And now she has this album. And I think that we forget that sometimes. Everything is so instantaneous today. We don't know what it's like to just put in time, and just get comfortable with something. Just keep doing it. So, pick a low risk item at the thrift store for $5 and do it. And even if it's not a piece you're really in love with, just do it just to do it. And make your mistakes and then eventually when you feel comfortable, then you say, okay, now I can take on, grandma's, Scandinavian credenza or, something that, might be more valuable and that you're scared of, or that antique piece that, but give yourself time to just like, not have to panic over the risk. Just take on those low risk pieces first.
Yes. So, all right. So tell me where we can actually get QCS. Yeah. And where can we find you? Where can we follow you? Where can people come to get tips and tricks from you? I think you mentioned you have a YouTube channel too, right?
Yeah. It's we don't have a lot of viewership yet, but we do have one.
We will send people your way for sure.
No, my thing is that again, I know when I'm looking for something, I don't care about the bells and whistles. I want what I'm looking for. And so I think that I'm trying to offer practical advice. So, as I'm showing the product, I'm not trying to just sell the product because that's honestly, maybe I'm just bad at business in this way. That's not my number one goal. My number one goal is that I really want people to get comfortable with restoration, to understand it and do it better than maybe they are now and do it safer. And so we just offer one part of that, one component of that whole thing, that whole process. And hopefully over time we can maybe even expand out, but right now it's that one product. And so we post videos all the time of me just stripping an item and then stripping another piece. And this one had paint and this one has shellac and this one has lacquer. I'm just trying to show techniques and it's casual. It's not instructional, step 1, step 2, because restoration isn't really that straight of a line. It's really like solving a puzzle. You have to really think around problems and problem solve. And so one approach on this might not work on that. And it's not so much just easy steps. It's really having a mind that thinks that way. So YouTube, you can follow us at StripWell, and Instagram is at StripWell. And I post in both. I do stories, reels, posts on there, trying to show the product in use. We share what other people are sharing with us of them using it and their experiences. So you kind of see real people using it and their response to it. And then our website is stripwell.com, and that's where you can purchase it there. And if it's outside of the U.S. right now, we're trying to find some channels to get outside of the U.S. We have a lot of interest, like tons of it coming from all over. It's too expensive right now to get it to people, so we're trying to find channels outside of the U.S. But right now, we could ship anywhere in the U.S., Hawaii. We could ship to Canada. We could ship anywhere because it's safe. We have no regulations against shipping it. It's just a matter of cost. I mean, it's already a little bit more of a premium price than you tack on the shipping. Some people, just kind of out of budget at this point, but we're working on that. All those we're new. So we're working on all those moving parts. So
can we talk about real quick before we go, can we talk about what the cost is and the different sizes that you may offer? Because I know the one that I offered, I'm not sure of the size, but it was like it's
a quarter, it's 32 ounces.
Was that
it's
okay.
32 ounce. That's what we're offering, 32 ounce. We are going to be offering other sizes. I can ship someone a 55 gallon drum to a professional shop. So we didn't want a product that was just a DIY product. We really wanted a professional product that DIYers could safely use. That was sort of the way we wanted to approach that. So a professional shop could easily just convert over, get away from ethylene chloride and go to QCS, and we could ship them a drum of it. But right now we offer to the consumer just a quart bottle. We offer anywhere up to a 4-pack. We based on the shipping because we use a flat rate shipping. So that's, anywhere from 1 bottle to 4 bottles is usually the range that people order, or they order more than 1 4-pack. And that bottle is $34.95 for the bottle plus shipping. And so you compare that to what's in stores, it is a more premium price. It's just that people are finding that it is saving them time and labor and other costs, sandpaper costs. And, so when you really average everything together, you realize it's not as expensive as the price tag might make it seem to be. And also, one thing I didn't say earlier that I wanted to is that if you capture, as you're stripping the item, if you capture it, like if you could put it in something where the runoff will collect, that can all be reused. It can be reused over and over. So you can, sometimes people will put it, I've had people put it in a kiddie pool. Like they put a piece in a kiddie pool, they spray it down, then all the runoff goes into there, and then they collect it into another container, and they use that for their scrubbing liquid for the next project.
Oh, that's so smart. Very smart.
Where a gel you would scrape off and discard, you can reuse QCS as much as you can recapture it. So it's all those little details that kind of adjust the pricing, but up front, it is a little bit like, oh, wow, that's a lot more than the other products I'm used to. But we think, again, we always say, what's your time worth and what's your health worth? Because that's our angle, that's our target. And whatever it takes to get there is what we're most passionate about. So,
well, I look at it this way. If you're paying a little bit more money up front, it means maybe you'll have less copays when you have to go to the emergency room or to the doctor because you've developed health problems because of the products that you're using. I look at food the same way. Like, we all know the cost of food material, like everything has just gone up. But just because the cost has gone up doesn't mean that I'm not going to eat well, because if I pay for a grocery bill, hopefully I won't have a hospital bill down the road because I've been eating all the wrong foods, One other question, I'm sorry, like I keep saying one more question, but it's like, as you talk, there's more things that I think of. So, when I think about stripping, you're pulling off all of this old material that is toxic, right? You're using non-toxic QCS, but you're pulling off this old stain. And how do you properly dispose of that? Because I know what we should do. We shouldn't necessarily, even though QCS can be, washed from your towels or things like that, you can pour it down the drain and it's not going to hurt anything. However, what do you do with all this stuff that you're pulling off? Like, do you have to take that to your local recycling center?
Yeah. So the best thing to do is, we check with your area, because there's all different, like California versus, another state might be different. California is very strict with regulations on things. But yeah, usually if you collect it in some sort of a tub of some kind, you can then find a place locally that you could safely discard it. That's like old paints and things like that are from around the house. There's usually a place nearby locally that you can take it to. That's usually your best option. The other thing though, that's nice is that the only waste with QCS is, what happens is a lot of times you'll see QCS kind of absorbs into the coating. And when you take it off, there's like such a little amount of waste. It's just that little thin coating of finish. Like sometimes the gels and the things you use make it almost seem worse than it is. And now you have twice as much material to get rid of. So that's one of the things that we found, is that it's mostly like there's some videos we have where we strip paint, and it's like literally it's just the paint comes off like in a sheet, and like there's almost no other residue. So it's very minimal. And oftentimes if you dry it out or let it, I know that there's additives that you could buy that you add to paint and things to just dry it out. Kitty litter people use, things like that. If it dries out, usually that's okay to discard in the trash, as long as it's dry and it's not liquidy, and that's what I found. But it depends on how much it is. And, if it's a little bit here and there, I would say dry it out, maybe out in the sun, let it dry, and then you could discard it. But check with your local area, because they'll tell you exactly what should be done. Then it's up to you if you want to do it that way. But that's usually the way I would go.
Yeah. When I was sampling it in the garage the other day, I have this desk. Well, actually, no, it's not a desk. I'm going to turn it into a desk. It is a door. I got it from, some salvage shop.
Yep.
And I sprayed it down, let it sit I probably didn't let it sit for long enough, but I didn't even have to let it sit for too long because it started pulling up, and there wasn't a thick coat, but it started pulling it up.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was wiping it off, I was using a scraper. As I was scraping it off, you're right. There wasn't like that excessive amount of gunk that comes off. It was literally just a single row of, I mean, it was amazing. I was like, wow, there's nothing here, but it's stripping it down. So I really liked it. And I could see immediately that there wasn't, like an excessive amount of waste that was created. I'm excited to use it. I mean, I'm excited to use it again on this project.
Yeah. What's nice about it is that when people use it, sometimes they'll say, oh, it's drying on me. And what's happening is it's most likely it's not drying. Some people, they'll do it outside in the sun. That might be causing it to dry. But usually what's happening is that QCS is actually getting into the surface coating. So it's not drying, it's actually absorbing in. And it has a way of just sort of releasing that surface coating, and then it just comes off. And it almost seems like the QCS is not even there anymore. It's just the coating, it's just that original finish. So we see that with paint and lacquer. So that's usually what happens. And all you have is that little bit of waste that was on the piece.
I feel like I want to find a piece of painted furniture that I've done and just strip it just to to try the QCS on the paint and see how it works on that. Yeah,
I always love seeing people are sending me videos on Instagram of them stripping paint. And I think that's the most rewarding visual is when you see like that sheet of paint just come off and there's like this walnut or something under it.
Beautiful.
And I'll say that QCS, I've said this all along the way, is we never marketed it as a silver bullet. Our goal is to slowly, as much as we can, chip away at the need for a green product in this area. And so I would say 75% of projects, QCS is going to do great for people, but then they're going to use it on certain paints and on certain finishes, and it's not going to work. And they're going to think, oh, what happened? Try it on something else, because there are those cases where you just run into a problem. You're like, oh, it's not going to work on that particular application. But our goal is to, is actually create some other formulas over time that are chemically, or the chemistry of it is geared towards different coatings. So it's really a chemistry thing. It's not a make it stronger. It's changing ingredients and tweaking it and making it go after different finishes and coatings.
Well, I'm really glad that you created this product because we need it. We want to be safe. We want to make the right choices. And I think over time, I have been trying to move into this space of being just more conscious of the materials that I'm using, because I know that people are looking at what I'm doing. And if I'm saying, hey, I'm using this product, they're going to think, well, Serena's using it, it's okay. Right. And that's why I had to do that podcast and that video to tell people, hey, I was using this other product and this is what I found out about it. I'm pretty sure the company was not happy because they didn't reach out to me after that.
Yeah. And then
that's
sometimes
okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but sometimes that actually creates change too. I mean, some of these companies are reworking formulas. Like I know for one, a big one out there is the Citrus Strip brand. And I know that they've changed their formula because they had NMP in it. And they changed their formula, took it out. And now you have to look, because depending on what version it is, you have to look closely, but one has it, one doesn't.
Wow.
And, but the only problem is by taking it out, something happened where now it's just acting differently and people are not happy with now how it's performing. So it's like, it's this weird equation that's always getting shifted. It's like, they want it to work a certain way, but they don't want it to have the toxins. And so it's tricky to find all that to align and make something that actually can kind of check off all the boxes.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. Well, I thank you for taking the time to talk with us, and everybody just go find Gary at stripwell.com. You can order it there. I'm going to be using the rest of the product that I have. I'll tell you real quick before we go. I had set it on the floor. This was when you sent it to me. I set it on the floor and I was moving something out of my garage and I stepped on the bottle and it flipped over and half of it spilled on the floor.
Oh,
I was like, no, I have to try this. Thankfully, I was able to save half of it and then use it on the door, strip the door. But I was upset about that. I was like, half of the bottle's gone.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, but I love it. I love it. And I'm sure people are going to love it as well. I'm going to continue using it because it's the best option for me right now. And I can even go get it locally from Woodcraft.
Yeah.
All right, Gary, thank you so much. If people have
Absolutely.
questions, they can find you at StripWell on Instagram.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll show you the products that, the projects that they've done using QCS.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's awesome. I'm glad that you love it, and hopefully, it'll keep going out there and we can help other people too.
Definitely. Okay.
So,
thank you.
So
that was an amazing episode, wasn't it? Okay. So I want to know from you down in the comments, let me know, what is the one thing that you learned from Gary about stripping furniture? I want to know just one thing. You can leave two if you want. Leave it down in the comments. Be sure to follow thriftdiving.com. If you're new, be sure to go and check Gary out on his channel. You can find the link down below, and I will see you next video.